like to welcome to the Additional Finance Committee today. And before we start, why don't we start with introductions so we know everyone who's here. And maybe we'll start, okay. We can start in the front. Introduce yourselves and then we'll get everybody introduced. Right there. Introduce yourself. Mary, introduce yourself, please.
I am Mary Nelson, and I represent the Utah School Board Association, but most importantly, I represent Utah School District.
Yes, I know.
Chad Swanson, and I'm a superintendent for South Summit School District.
John Larson, Business Administrator, Jordan.
Who's here?
Chris Lewis, Granite.
And Chris, what do you do in Granite? Thank you. And we'd love to have our wonderful officer introduce himself as well. We're very glad to have you. Thank you for coming here with us.
It's his first time.
I know I have never met you before, so
On the hill, I assure you. There's not a
we're a lot more fun. Take this assignment. Okay, and then we'll go around the room, and why don't we start with Michelle and go right around this way and introduce ourselves, please. You want to use your mic, Michelle. Thank you.
Michelle Buse, Assistant Attorney General.
Cami Wilcox, Administrative Service Manager.
Scott Jones, Deputy Superintendent of Operations and Cammie's assistant.
Michelle Bolter, District 15, State Board Member.
Scott Nielsen, District 13.
Mark Huntsman, District, well, I think state, but 14.
Angie Stallings, Deputy Superintendent of Policy here at the State Board of Education.
Tamara Daly, I'm the project lead on the school fees.
Okay, and I'm Laura Belknap. I'll be chairing this with Scott Nelson as the vice chair. So we're going to just go right into the school's fee rule, and Angie's going to go over what from last meeting, the changes that have been made. You can see that in draft 5 on your docs, or if committees have paper, if you depend on how you want to look at it. Thank you, Miss Angie.
Yes, thank you. So after last meeting, you'll remember there were quite a few discussion items as well as motions that you asked me to either research or incorporate into a draft. We did that in draft 5. So I'm going to go through the changes and make you aware of some of the new definitions we have and the way we addressed a couple of the concerns that were raised by members of the public. Specifically, the VAs had a lot of good comments last time that we made some changes based on their feedback. So the first thing is on page 3. We have a new definition starting on line 63. It's line 63 through 66. The term instructional equipment was we put in here to kind of deal with that issue that the BAs were asking about. One example would be like CTE materials, like the barbering equipment or the equipment that you need to get your CNA or other certificate. It's not quite instructional materials or textbooks, but it's not student supplies either, because student supplies, by the definition, mean those things that you commonly find in your home. So we have a new definition of instructional equipment, which means equipment or supplies required for a student to use as part of a secondary course that become the property of the student upon exiting the course. And so this equipment would still be subject to, you could charge a fee for it, as well as subject to fee waiver. But it wouldn't be like the other textbooks and instructional materials where LEAs would now be prohibited from charging a fee for it. So, and you'll see that when we get to textbooks on page 6, so that's line 61, that textbook does not include instructional equipment. So therefore, you should never have an argument that the barbering supplies is a textbook or instructional materials, and therefore LEAs may charge fees for those. However, they are subject to fee waiver. Any questions about that? So it was lines 63 through 66. You can see the blue writing. It's on page 3. page 3.
Angie, I think I'll ask committee if they have any
Yeah.
questions or comments. Does anyone have any questions or comments on that 63 through 66? Okay, Angie.
Okay, great. Then on page 7, lines 239 through 243, the language there was stricken because it's duplicative. It's, and I'll explain. So page 7, oh, I'm sorry.
We're on front page.
It's lines 171 through 175, which are duplicative of lines 239 and 243. So go to page 7, line 171. All of the language there in that former 2A is dealing with activities outside of the regular school day. And there's a whole section on activities outside of the regular school day that starts on 239. So this language we decided was not needed because it's duplicative of what the language is on lines 239 through 243. Okay? Same with the strikeout on 178. The outside of the school day, that's all in another.
It's already in there somewhere
section
else.
4. This is section 3 of the bill, or the rule, and section 4 deals with activities outside of the school day. Any questions about that? Okay. Then on page 8, you'll see the word student included in there a couple times. That's, the defined term is actually student supplies. So we're adding the word student because the defined term is not just supplies, but student supplies. Then turn to page 9. And on page 9, starting on line 223, you'll see some language has been stricken. That language also was repetitive of essentially, so 7A and 7B were repetitive, so we got rid of 7B and just left 7A there. So that was it. Any questions about that? So one of the biggest things we talked about last meeting, if you turn to page 11 and start at line 289, there were representatives of LEAs wondering, do we have to comply with these things if we decide we're not going to charge a fee? Because it seemed like all LEAs had to do a lot of things, even if they chose not to charge a fee. So in 2 places here, this is one of the places where we make it clear that if you as an LEA or as a school decide not to charge a fee at all, any fees, then you don't need to adopt or approve a fee schedule or fee waiver policies because you have no fees. So there you can see on line 289, if an LEA charges a fee, then on or before April 1, and in consultation with stakeholders, they adopt a fee schedule and fee waiver policies. Okay, any questions about that? The second place we do that is on page 13, starting on line 339, which is when an LEA, how they publish and make parents and members of the community aware of their fee schedule and their fee policies. So again, on line 336, they only have to do that if they actually charge a fee. Okay, and then the next part was, if you remember, this rule requires that if you have a student and parent population that speaks their first language or their language at home is a language other than English, and 20% or more of the families in your district speak that language, then you also have to publish your fee schedule and your policies in that second language. One of the questions we had was what happens, so if you don't proactively publish, then the LEA or the district or charter has the obligation or responsibility to meet one-on-one with those families that might have some different languages that are not quite hit the 20%. Somebody asked, well, what if we're at 15 or 16% and we decide to go ahead and publish our fee schedule also in French or Spanish? Then yes, you don't have to meet with parents. So you can see that I changed the language to say, an LEA representative shall meet personally with each student's parent or family and make available an interpreter for the parent to understand the LEA's fee waiver schedules and policies if the student or parent's first language is a language other than English and the LEA hasn't published the LEA's fee schedule and fee waiver policies in the parent's first language. So the LEA could decide to proactively publish in other languages if they'd like. Okay. Any questions?
Any other questions from here? John, can you give me a nod? Does that suffice what you asked last time? Thank you.
All right. Should I keep going, Chair? Okay. On line 14, you'll see on line 363, we're removing that language, and that's mostly because in this rule, we don't require, or LEAs can no longer require students to perform community service if they get fee waivers, and that was essentially a resource that was provided talking about community service requirements for students who receive fee waivers. So since we no longer require that in here or allow it, that was stricken. Okay. All right, the next page is page 21. And this kind of relates to the very last page, but I'll go ahead and remind everybody that last meeting, the committee voted to have this updated rule take effect for the 2020-21 school year. So you'll see at the very end of the document that the rule will take effect on January 1, 2020, so that all of the notification requirements, the fee schedule adoption, the public hearing requirements, et cetera, are in place during the spring. But this was one of the biggest changes, which is stating that an LEA may not charge a fee for textbooks. And so we put in here that beginning with the 2021 school year, so that they don't have a question of whether or not starting in the spring they can't charge for textbooks. They can. They can wait till the next school year. So, and then the other thing that we realized is that the language on lines 566 through 570 essentially are the requirements to qualify for fee waiver. And so instead of putting that language in there, we just say a fee for textbook used for concurrent enrollment or advanced placement course is fee waivable as described in section 8. So it makes it, they only have to have one process. And that's also for remediation. So charges for remediation, textbooks, all of that would take place or be in effect for the 2021 school year at the earliest. Any questions about that? Okay, just the changes on line 585 through 586 on page 22 are really mostly just stylistic and technical. We were asked to kind of we no longer use the S3 statistical report. It's now called the annual year-end report. Okay. On 617, I'll just note for the record that we have a section error there that I'll fix. It's actually on the end of line 617, it's actually R277407 section 14, not 8. So I'll fix that. And then you could make that motion if you'd like, but that's accurate. And then the other thing that we missed is on line 639 on page 24. The subsection 5A should actually just be subsection 5. So we'll take off that A. Then the last thing on the last page, lines 663 and 664, you'll see that this rule shows that it'll take effect beginning January 1, 2020. That's it.
Okay, I know that we have some public that would like to speak. Royce?
I figured it out, never mind.
Oh, you got it? Okay, is there anyone else in the public that would like to speak? Carol, we will go to your amendments in a minute, okay? Did you hear me, Carol? Okay, sorry, I didn't see that. Maybe because I had my close-up glasses on. Does anyone in the public have any questions or comments that they have? Okay, then we'll go back to committee. Ange, do you want to start with, Carol, do you want to come to the table with us?
Sure.
Okay.
Chair Barr, here?
Yeah, probably there. You're a million miles away, however. But do you want to introduce yourself, and then we'll just keep going with, is it okay if we have Angie, or do you want to go through your amendments? What would you prefer? They're your amendments.
Am I on?
Yes.
My name's Carol Lear. I'm a State Board of Education member. I'd kind of like to go through my own amendments.
Okay.
She was very helpful, but I feel like I have the personal satisfaction of feeling like I've expressed my thoughts, so.
Okay,
That's-
so the public, they are on the board docs, so if you want to pull them up, you can also follow. Are you going to follow along, Angie? So that be up there? Okay. Is Scott doing it? Oh, thanks, Scott. No, I didn't know who was doing it. You're just good spinners. Thank you, Carol.
I have one question related to your most recent discussion. I'll save that till the end. And I've indicated these or rather Angie's helped me indicate them as separate amendments, so you can either consider them in the moment, or you can wait till I'm through and you can ask me questions.
Let's do one at a time.
Do
I
whatever
think
you
that'll
want.
be better, Carol, okay?
That's fine. Okay, the first amendment that I was concerned about is on lines 196 through 198, which is I don't have the page numbers anymore. 8. Let me just give you a little rationale for this. This would allow a teacher to offer an additional discretionary project in lieu of or in addition to other projects, and this, in my mind, gives deference to teachers. It also gives deference to extra credit that's older than time. It also allows for project-based or competency-based education, which relies a lot on student initiative and teachers' style of teaching. This allows that teacher to offer an additional discretionary project, and we repeated that phrase consistently so that it is understood that it's not just a project, it's an additional discretionary project, so long as the teacher also provides a similar opportunity that's low cost or free. And the language just reflects that rationale. My thinking was this allows the teacher a lot of discretion. It also allows families discretion, but it is fair for children of all economic levels. And I wanted to give as much flexibility to the LEAs as possible. If a teacher herself says, I would rather not deal with discretionary projects or extra credit or whatever, then she doesn't have to at all. But this gives a teacher some flexibility in determining how her classes run.
Thank you, Carol. Comments by committee members or questions? Mark?
Yeah, I'm liking where this is going, but then I'm also putting myself, trying to look at this in other people's lenses, and it's like, okay, we have a fee that's in the fee, it's on a fee schedule, everybody's on board, it's gone through this process, and accounting's all set up within the district, and now the teacher could come up with another fee without that going through that same process, and I'm just my concern is, and of course it says at a lower cost, so it's almost like this ceiling. So I'm looking at the challenge that's going to be placed on the local board and the administration of not only the school but of the district, of trying to track the special projects or the special another fee that's not part of the April or whatever it is standard
Their fee schedule.
Can I
fee
respond?
schedule. So that's one of my biggest concerns is that I see is it would be opening up another Pandora's box.
Okay. Thank you.
That's a concern.
Are you done, Chair?
Yes.
Can I
Carol?
respond to that? My thought was that if a teacher, it's interesting, just up at the Capitol today, I ran into one of my children's elementary school teachers whose name is Mrs. Bruce, and she was one of the best teachers my kids ever had. And her whole teaching in second grade was individualized, and she let students do all kinds of projects all the time. Of course, that wouldn't go over well probably 30 years later, 20 years later, and that kind of random process. But if you had a teacher like Mrs. Bruce, she could say, and she was an elementary teacher too, so maybe it's not such an apt analogy, but she could say, my class is project-based. I would like to have on the fee schedule a cost not to exceed $50 for possible extra discretionary projects. And that would probably be a secondary teacher that would work, that would make the most sense. So that, it would put some responsibility to the teacher to say, I like extra credit, I like projects that might be extra credit, I like my curriculum is, or my teaching style is project-based. So she'd have to prepare in advance, you're right, Chair Huntsman. And if she didn't, if this came to her in the middle of the year, she could go to the board and say, I'd like to add this to the fee schedule because this is the nature of the way I teach this class.
Question, Angie?
I think one thing, and maybe we need some more clarification, but in some ways, the way that at least B1 reads, so that up until you get to B2, is it's about giving the teacher the ability to say, sure, if you'd like to do the armoire instead of the birdhouse, you can, as long as you pay for the additional discretionary project. The other thing that I had thought about that I thought might be helpful is to think about science fairs or other kind of projects, even in the elementary level, where they might do projects outside, and whether you want to allow students to do different projects. And I guess the question is, I don't think that would need to be something on the fee schedule, because again, it's not something you're requiring the student to do. It's not a required fee. It's the student and the family on their own saying, we want to do something above and beyond what the course is requiring. So it's a little different than the teacher going out and saying, here's an extra fee. It's really more, you would think, student and parent driven, saying, for the science fair, we understand you all provided us these materials, but we'd like to do the lava, thing versus whatever. So I don't know if that's.
Do you? Yeah. I guess, Michelle, I'm with you. Michelle said I think they can do that anyway. So, Carol, I'm really trying to envision what you're thinking, because I'm thinking if we go, I'll go back to the birdhouse. If the fee is to build the birdhouse in woodshop, and every student can do that, it's fee waivable. But the one wants to build the duplex birdhouse, then that student should be responsible to pay the additional cost, because that doesn't change what they can learn in the class. So I'm not sure that double I needs to be there. If you could help me, I'm
just thinking that there was a lengthy discussion in the school fees task force about whether these projects should be allowed at all. Michelle has a thought too that maybe would add to the understanding. I'm not sure if it's relevant, but there was a large or extensive discussion about allowing those projects at all. The end result was in the earlier versions of this, a prohibition against additional discretionary projects, and just flat out, which to me seems unduly restrictive and unnecessarily restrictive. But then I also get the argument of, we want every child to be able to do additional discretionary projects if that's going to affect their grade. So that's why I thought it was important. And I think our examples can get very arcane and very unrealistic, but I was thinking of the simple kind of thing, not so much the science fair project, but I was thinking of teacher offering an extra credit assignment for ninth graders that says you're in a choir, and you need to attend, if you'd like to enhance your grade, you can attend a musical presentation, and here's a list of them that you might want to attend. And one of them's the Utah Symphony, and it costs a lot. But one of them's also the Alta School Choir at Christmas time that's free. So I would like to encourage teachers to encourage that kind of project-based learning. And I don't want it just to be prohibited for fairness sake, but I think the fairness component is important. That's why the two little I.
Michelle?
It was Michelle Buse is who I meant. But
Oh,
I think
sorry.
I think you covered the issue that I was going to bring up is this isn't, she's not bringing up something new already in the rule. It has the ability for the discretionary projects. It's just that she changed it from the school the school doing it to the teacher making that discretionary.
Yeah, that's what rubs me. Then the teacher everything falls on them. So that's where I'm having my rub a little bit. Royce?
Royce Van Tassel, Utah Association of Public Charter Schools. And I'm not saying this in any way to oppose what Carol is suggesting. I'm just thinking, knowing how some of questions that I've received from some of my charter schools and how one might understand this. You've sort of talked about an armoire. I can imagine a teacher saying that one way you could have get extra credit is to take a trip to Italy or what have you. And that's taking it, I admitted, purposefully I'm saying, how far does this go? Because I know that there are charter schools that have gone down that road and they're wondering, what does this mean? And I'm telling them, you should be really conservative and look very carefully at what you're doing. And that makes me nervous. I don't know. I don't think Carol is trying to rope that in, but I don't think it would be difficult for a teacher to say, this is an opportunity, and you can take a trip, because I'm going to take a trip through, and we're going to go to Italy, or we're going to go to Washington, D.C., or we're going to go to wherever. And, you know, these have legitimate educational benefits. I'm not questioning that, but I'm asking how big is what you're proposing, Carol? And it's not a bad idea. I just don't know where the guardrails are.
May I, Chair? In the spirit of processing this, and I'm all about process, so I appreciate your exaggerated example. But I would say, I hope the teacher does say, and kind of putting it in a different light, your family's going to Africa on a safari because you're really wealthy. I hope you can make that a learning experience and come back, and yes, I'll give you extra credit for it, but oh wait, any other child of any economic standard can earn the same extra credit by watching a video. And that's all I'm saying is that I don't want to over-process this or overthink this. I just want to give flexibility to families and teachers to have a opportunity to have projects and do things, and then have it be able to be a positive influence on their scores or grades.
Oh, okay. Well, I thought you whispered inside of that.
No,
Okay.
it is yes.
So help me understand this a little bit, and maybe maybe our AAGs can weigh in on it. My question is, on this, does the board have full control over this activity, proposed activity that a teacher wants to do under II? Or does it not go before the board?
You mean the local board? I don't think. This is turning into a way more complicated idea. I just didn't want these projects to be prohibited. That was my sole goal. I wanted, and to make that fair, to make it even-handed opportunity for rich and poor. I wanted to say, if you have in your class, if you like project-based learning, then make sure you have opportunities that the families who can go to Africa can take, and opportunities that the families who came from Africa can take.
Wait just a minute, Michelle?
Oh, I just had a quick question. If a teacher is doing a class and it's a project-based learning class, then wouldn't she, prior to the year starting, need to have a list of those projects and the fees for each student?
Yes.
And then it would be approved already. She could have also additional projects listed on there as well that a student could choose from. And then, of course, if a student wants to go beyond that listed project, they're able to, but the cost would fall on the student because, I mean, wouldn't that be, okay. I was just checking.
Go ahead, Angie.
Something that Royce said kind of concerned me a little bit, in the sense that if you look at 5A, we're really talking about project-based courses. We're not talking, this isn't really talking about extra credit for music or extra credit for your Italian class. Because I guess I don't know if language, a trip to Italy, I don't even know how that could be a project-based course. And maybe this is where I'm saying this, do we need more clarification? Because we're really talking about things like the birdhouses and the armoires, not about extra credit to go to Italy or the symphony or New York. So in a lot of ways, I would think that if a teacher is saying, I'm going to Italy, and we're going to collect the money here at ABC District or Charter School, and it's all related to the Italian class, that's not an additional discretionary project. That's now a provided or approved, sponsored program or activity. So I think it would be fee waivable, et cetera. So I guess I think this language here that we're discussing right now is really meant to talk about projects and project-related courses, like when you have to do a diorama or a science fair project, or not I just don't know how a trip to Italy would ever fit in this.
I think he was just using that as an extreme example. I don't think, sorry if it's okay if I respond, and then Royce can.
Well, I'm not really sure that either one of you need to. What I was going to do is
I think we're missing each other in our discussion of this.
I know, I think we're going to continue to banter on that level, would be my assumption. But does anyone in the committee want to make a motion on this? Okay, so Carol, will you go on to your amendment 2?
Sure, I'll bring it up in the state board meeting and see if maybe I can be clearer then. Because I think we're overthinking it. Sorry about that. I just didn't want it prohibited. That was my whole goal.
And so do you?
Number 2.
I will go back, but do you think that under project-related courses under 5, that prohibits a teacher from choosing?
If the old language said that a teacher may not offer, and I'm paraphrasing, I don't have the exact old language now in front of me, but if the rule said a teacher may not, it didn't even say allow but not require.
Where is that, Angie? I don't know where that is, that may not, because that isn't what I see.
It said that in the old, several versions ago.
As a school may require a student at any grade level to provide materials or pay for an additional discretionary project. Is that the language?
I think so.
If the student chooses a project in lieu of or in addition to a required classroom project.
That there was,
I think I know what you're talking about, Carol, and I don't think it's here
Here
anymore,
it is. It's 202.
Where?
I think 202 to 204.
Okay.
A school may not require a student to select an additional project as a condition to enrolling, completing, or receiving the highest grade possible for a course.
and if you think may not require means that it is allowable,
I think it's allowable.
then I think I wasn't reading it that way, and if it,
Go ahead. and
So
then
my
I'll come-
recollection was they wanted to make it clear that those high-cost discretionary additional projects, if the only way you could get an A was to do one of those, then no, you can't, a student may not be required to select one of those and pay for one of those to get the highest grade. So that was kind of the compromise, but they still wanted to allow students to select the additional projects. And so that's kind of why we have B, C, and D there.
so sorry to waste half hour
No,
of your time.
it's
You'll never
okay.
get back.
Okay, let's
But-
go on to number 2.
I think it's now understood. I feel very good about that because English teachers do it, math teachers can do it. It's something that I would love the flexibility to do.
Thank you, Carol.
Number 2 is related to the number 1, where it said a student may select an additional in lieu of an addition to if the student provides the materials or pays. So it didn't seem necessary if we had number 1 or the first amendment.
Right.
So would you say that we probably do need it now because of the way it was stated? Because it fills a gap now.
If you think so, I don't have a strong
Thank you.
opinion about that.
Okay.
You'll be
Amendment
happy
3.
to know that most of these are all simple compared to the last one.
Yeah, I know
The
that.
first one. Number 3,
Let's just say lines 202, so for people who are here.
line 202 is the same issue. May not require a student to select an additional optional project, addition for enrolling, et cetera. Same discussion as amendment number 1, which was lines 196 or not 198.
Okay.
Amendment number 4, I wanted to make sure that rationale for this was that all newly enrolling students would get fee waiver schedules and information, as well as those who are enrolled the first of the year. So the lines on 3 little I are new.
Okay, we're on lines 337 to 341. And,
I don't think that's controversial.
So which,
hold on. So,
So 6, little I, annually published.
so Carol, oh, this is an and right there. So really, you're just adding and then the triple I.
Right. That's it.
LEA's fee schedule. Okay. So do I have a motion on that amendment?
I'll make it on
Okay,
4.
okay. Any comment to that? Any comment from the public? Okay. Well, let's take a vote on Amendment 4 to include annually, take out and the triple I in Carol's Amendment 4. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Unanimous. Thank you.
The next one's simple also. There's a conversation, and the task force discussed this a little bit, but there was a poster that was initially provided to explain all of fee waiver elements and requirements and provide parents notice that they could request fee waivers. This poster is still provided for in the rule, which seems a little archaic, but okay, it's there. And it's still in the permanent injunction. I just thought it was important to note, again, pretty minor, but there's not any old poster. If they're required to post a poster, if LEAs are required to post a poster, it should be the board's identified poster, not some summary of their own about fee waivers.
So Carol brings up an interesting question for us about having a poster and how often, and what should be on that poster, and if it's just the fees or where you find fee waivers. I'd be interested in your thoughts on that.
Does anybody have a copy of that old poster from 30 years ago?
Yes, Angie, please.
So the interesting thing about this section where we've got, it's essentially lines 353 through 366 was a list of elements or materials that were referred to in the permanent injunction, and that at one point I'm sure our office had and distributed to schools. And at the time that this task force discussed these items, we didn't know whether to put those in the rule or not, because we weren't sure moving forward if we would still use those materials or not, and also how much the permanent injunction still applies to us. So in the permanent injunction, it says that the board has these materials and that we're distributing them to LEAs, but the reality may be that they're outdated, they haven't been done for years. So, and we have new staff who are going to be looking at all the types of materials and support, et cetera, model policies, model forms, and we don't know what the names of those are yet. So one thing you could do if you wanted to be safe and repeat what's in the permanent injunction, that's why those are in here. Or you could strike a lot of those things. The other thing we had talked about is just starting down the road with this rule and having these reference materials in there, and then later on, after Tamara has had some time to get her feet wet and bearings, and finding out what materials and we will be providing, that then we could take it out. So, I don't know if you have any.
No, I certainly am of the opinion that we need to maybe take a look at this and find something relevant for today and relevant to the people that is going out. And, we want to draw other people into the conversation that, are used to and be able to, how do we best reach these people? I apologize, that's the wrong terminology, these people.
Carol, thank you. I'm really interested in if we didn't even keep in those posters, but the other things, because they're really talking about getting the information out.
How do we
We
best
don't
do
run
that?
by the walls of the schools anymore, we run by the internet. And so I'm just wondering if we take a school poster out, or we create a document instead of a poster, the terminology.
Yeah, we could
I got it.
Posters out, yeah.
Chair, and then Mary.
Maybe it's for superintendent. We require, not that posters, I don't think posters are totally antiquated right now, but not completely, but we require certain posters to be placed in certain locations. And I think for this purpose, especially with this being new, I think it could come out later, but I don't know. Well, if we're going to require a poster, then we should follow the same guidelines as what we have in other rules and mandates. Again, another poster. So what posters do we have now, and how relevant are they? I guess this is my question because they do catch people's eyes, and I know that some of our people that don't have the internet, and that as they're purposely placed to accommodate as a reminder to parents and public as they come in and out of that school. So
And Sid, you're going to answer that, and do we require it to be in additional languages or just in English when we have a poster requirement?
So my favorite answer is always, it depends. Some of them require a visual display of, or I'm sure there's language of poster, but what I'm starting to see in schools is some of these, like the stretch banners that they post right in the middle of a hall, near an office or hallway. Poster connotes a certain thing, and then you have to go in and say, is it more than 8.5 by 11? So right now there's one on, you'll see some on drug-free school zones. There's one on,
I think in God We Trust is still required to be in every class.
yeah, God We Trust, but it doesn't say it has to be on a poster.
No.
You just have to.
This has to be posted.
So that's what I was meaning by just the term poster, that you could say a visual posting in a visible place, whatever it is. But I just think then people start calling and saying, how big does the poster need to be and what kind of paper does it need to be on? So the language around, to Chair Huntsman's point, some kind of very visible posting where, in a point where, people enter the school, something, or your usual ways of posting so that families of cultural and language, various backgrounds can access the information. Because you have, whether it's a language or cultural, sometimes you have people that won't come into the school. So how do they get that word out? So it's really about making sure everybody has the information.
Oh, I like that term, posted. Mary?
And we had
Your mic, and introduce yourself again, please.
Okay, I'm Mary Nelson from Geauga School District, and we had this conversation on the task force, and the reason we left it in there is because Representative Lisenby made the comment that she does not have the internet in her home. And she said, I don't think I'm the only person in Davis School District that does not have the internet in my home. So she made the comment that it can be a flyer or whatever. And so the reason that we didn't change the language is because we didn't know what that would look like.
What that would look
And
like.
so I think it just needs to be whatever Dr. Dixon said, whether it's a flyer, however we post that in this day and age. So I think that Board Member Lear is right. It doesn't need to necessarily be a poster, but it needs to be somehow posted in whatever language that school needs it to be posted in, whether that's multiple languages. So that was just what I wanted
posted
to
on the
remind
web,
us
or
of,
posted on the wall.
that
Okay.
that's how the task force, that's why we left it.
Thank you, Mary.
You bet.
Michelle?
Most of the notifications that federally and by state that are required to be given to parents generally say in the policy handbook that the students receive, a student handbook or registration materials.
Or in
are-
registration
So the
materials.
ones, both federally and state that I have seen, say in the student handbook or in registration materials. They don't say posted on walls anymore. And that way it goes home with every student on their first day at that school with their registration materials.
So would the committee be okay if we had Angie work this, if you're okay with this? I really appreciate Carol bringing forward that it needs to be the board poster, but if you could incorporate that, and maybe it's not a poster, it's a posting, or some other type of verbiage. Angie?
Well, one thing I just wanted to mention, just right
materials.
above, just right above, they are required to put all of this information in their registration materials, whether that's a policy handbook or however they get it to families who don't have the internet. So we can, do you see, that was the Amendment 4 we just barely
Yeah.
did, where it requires an LEA to include a
Yeah.
copy of the fee waiver policies and fee schedule in their registration materials. So,
But I like the idea of having it posted.
Posting somewhere
I
in the school.
appreciate that now, being reminded by Mary.
so maybe a visual representation in, I don't know.
Does the committee have any,
The other,
Rob, with them coming up with the good verbiage for it to be posted?
I don't.
or posting.
But make sure that, I really appreciate Carol's thought that it needs to be the board information.
Yes.
But so somehow we need to incorporate that.
Right.
Is the committee okay with that? Michelle?
That's already on line 352. All of those things have to be in a form approved by the
Yeah,
board.
right.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. Are you okay, Angie, if you bring that back, if we get this out?
I have a
What?
clarification.
Okay, Michelle?
Sorry, this is under the section that if an LEA hasn't published the fee schedule in the parent's first language. So if they have published in the parent's first language on the website or something, then they wouldn't have to do these things. Or do we still want something posted in the school regarding this in a visible place? So I just didn't know.
So lines 336 through 340, it's not 337 through 341, but it's actually 336 through 340, apply to all. It's not just, starting at 341, we talk about the additional languages. Is that, do you see there where it says 339, 340 include the copies with the registration materials?
Right, but I'm just talking about Board Member Lear's amendment is 350, line 358 and
I could have the wrong.
Yeah.
366.
But that's for the notice for all of 6, which maybe it should say 6A. Maybe we should say 6A to be clearer. Because 6B and C are about the alternative languages, but 6A is the core
Okay,
notice
so maybe we
requirement.
should clear that up.
I could do that. Should
Okay.
we add 6A?
Yeah, that's fine.
One just final thought about that. My point was not, I don't care so much about whether there's a poster or not a poster. I just feel like it is important from LEA to LEA that there's consistent language on whatever form or posting or document there is. That's my whole point in putting board in there. So that over time, it doesn't become JUAP's fee waiver policy versus Salt Lake's fee waiver policy versus Logan's fee waiver policy versus Channing Hall's fee waiver policy.
Thank you, Carol. Do you
You
want?
ready for the last one?
I don't know. Let me hold on a minute. Okay, ready.
The last one, again, the concept's much simpler than the discussion are seemingly becoming. But, and this is only in the most extreme example that we hope never happens, and that is if there is an effort if there is an LEA that's not complying with fee waiver requirements, and so we're to the end of our ropes, and it's after 5 years of warning, then the LEA still is not in compliance, then there's the nuclear option of withholding funds from the LEA. And if that should be the case, felt like it should be the board that makes that final decision to withhold the funds as opposed to the superintendent. And that's usually the case with other rules where there's a withholding of funds, that the board makes that final determination. And that was my whole point. The exact language or investigative process was less important than to me, that the board in the end would make that determination. So that's the whole point of the language in this, and you can fuss with the investigative process and at what point the board enters in, but it just, in the end, I think it's very important that the board makes the final decision.
Okay, Carol, go ahead, Chair.
So just going through this really quick, I appreciate that. And then are you, Chair, are you going to act on this separately, this one particular line, or are you going to do the whole amendment all at once?
Amendment 6, I think it's all changing superintendent to board.
But it's
Oh, yeah,
between lines, it's lines 644 through, because she's listing the lines where it's listed, but so there's 6, so what is it?
It starts on line 643, so 643 through 662. And there are a couple superintendents still left in there, I think just one, and that was on purpose because it would say that if either the person doesn't request a hearing or the board finds that the allegations are true, then the superintendent may continue with the corrective action. But the other places, like actually imposing the financial consequences, anyway, there was a reason why I kept one of them as superintendent, because it seemed like that would be a staff thing to do.
She would further the investigation.
Mm-hmm.
I think, isn't that the one in 650?
Yes.
Okay. All right,
Then the rest of them are
there's kind of an assumption we're going to take it all out, but
Okay,
We're not.
yeah, so we might have to do each one because there's one place, I've thought a lot about this since I read it, and I have a couple of thoughts, and you can maybe not like them, but maybe. We are making the rule. We either accept the rule as written or we don't. That these are the consequences for not complying with what's there. And there are a lot of steps before there's the heavy hand. There are a lot of steps. And so we decide that that's the rule. We should allow our staff to implement our rule, but if there's a, what's it called? Not a hearing. What is it called? An appeal, thank you. But if there's an appeal, then it would come back to us about our rules. So I actually don't like all these amendments, the amendment inside of the amendment. So taking it out superintendent on line 7, I wouldn't do. I'm just giving my opinion for now and not a motion, and I wouldn't take it out on 6. However, he's authority to charge appropriate fees for the amount by the board's decision. I think on line 11, the board's decision described in 9 is final and no further appeals are provided. I think that should be the board on 11. So I'd love any other discussion that we have up here. Maybe you totally different thoughts than I do. Michelle?
If the board's making on 11, if the board is making the decision in subsection 9, you need to change from 9 down. You have to change the one in 9 to be the board that makes that
I'm
decision.
not making a motion. I'm
Okay.
just working through this.
Okay.
Thank you. Scott?
I'm hesitant to make changes because we have essentially an executive officer, which is the state superintendent, and this is from my opinion, from my estimation, we're entrusting that individual to act on behalf of the board when the board's not in session, when the board's not around, and especially into these circumstances, to where I don't feel like these changes would be absolutely necessary. That's just my opinion.
Okay. I agree with Board Member Lear's amendments, at least for lines 9 down, being the board, because we are elected to oversee the funds. So ultimately, it is our oversight. I mean, it is our job. And so if an LEA does not request a hearing, or if after a hearing, the board finds the allegations. So I'm fine with 9 down. I'd have to think about it for the above ones, but I agree with what Board Member Lear said, that it is ultimately, at the end of the day, it's our decision, and it should come back to us as board members for something like
And so who
that.
would they appeal to? If we're the appellate board in this case, who would they appeal to when we tell them we're going to withhold your funds? Then who do they appeal to? The board that took their money?
They
The
go to
group that
court.
took it?
They go to court if the board finally says, we're going to withhold
I
funds.
know, but there's processes along here where they can come back to us and appeal, and so they're appealing the people who
And again, I didn't. That's, my point was just, if you want to fuss with the internal, who goes first and who's on second, then that, I don't have a strong feeling about that. I have a strong feeling about the board, not only in the Paren 11 at the very end, the board making the final administrative decision, but I think that the board should also make the decision to withhold the funds. Because as we've seen recently, and sometimes the board decides to waive its rules. Sometimes it doesn't. The superintendent doesn't have that authority, the board does. There are 3 other rules, at least administrative rules, that talk about withholding funds, and in all of those rules, the board is the body, the entity that withholds the funds, not the superintendent. And I just think for consistency's sake, and because this is so important, that it should be the board taking that action. I agree with what Scott says in terms of the executive officer, but the board may get to this point and say, wait, this is such an unusual circumstance that let's waive this rule that the funds be withheld. And damn the torpedoes. So I think that's why I think it's important that the board be the final decision maker, decider, so to speak.
I think we really are working on the hard questions today, Carol, okay? And I still don't understand in 9, who are they are going to come back and request a hearing from if the board...
Well, up until 9, it's the superintendent. I wouldn't change it to the board until 9.
So until 9.
Right.
Okay, that's what you're saying?
I would,
And
yeah.
then the LA may, within 15 days, receipt. Okay, let me read.
So if the LEA does,
Does not
let's just
request
start
a
with 9. If the LEA does not request a hearing, or after the hearing, the board finds the allegations of noncompliance are substantially true. So the board agrees with the superintendent on the one hand,
Right.
or has a hearing and then finds that the allegations are true. The superintendent or board may continue, and I left that or open-ended so that if it's the board's corrective action, that continues. If the superintendent's corrective action, that continues. Formulate a new form of corrective action or additional, I'm looking in the middle of 9 now, or board may continue with the suggested corrective action, formulate a new form of corrective action, or additional terms and conditions which must be met and may proceed with the appropriate remedy, which may include an order to return funds are properly collected. That's all of 9, which is a little bit of gobbledygook and probably could be streamlined. And then it goes on in parentheses 10 to say a financial consequence may include those things. And B is one of the consequences could be until the LEA comes into full compliance with the board's corrective action plan, because that was the last corrective action plan that was appealed. It could be C, suspending the LEA's authority to charge appropriate fees for an amount of time specified by the board. I think the board should make that call if there's going to be a suspension of the right to charge fees, and it might be some fees or all fees. That's why I stuck appropriate in there. And then the last, paren 11, is the board's decision is the final administrative action. So I don't know if that helps, but that's kind of what I was thinking.
Thank you, Carol. Angie, do you have a thought?
Well, I just noticed that in 8B, I assumed that the appeal would be to the board, but it doesn't really say to the board. So it says the LEA may, within 15 days after receipt of such notice, request an appeal.
It should say to the board there, I think.
Yeah, so I guess what I'm wondering, so if you still allowed the superintendent to do everything until you got to 8B, you had the appeal be before the board, essentially the board will become the body taking action after that if they choose to appeal, right? If they don't choose to appeal, there may be a reason. Maybe it's because they don't want to publicly have to have a whole hearing in front of the board before the financial, because on one hand, they may be like, you know what, you're right. We did something wrong. We probably need to repay this back. In a sense, you're actually requiring this to become much more public once the board has to take action versus a superintendent. So that's something else to consider. If an LEA feels comfortable with what the corrective action is and does not want it to be part of a public hearing, there is a benefit to having the superintendent be the one who does it. I'm just throwing that out there because it doesn't make it a matter of public record.
Although I don't know that I think the board, I think it's worth contemplating what that could look like. I don't know that it has to be a public shaming or a public board action. It could
Well,
be
if the board takes action, though, it would have to be public.
final action.
So-
True, the final action, but it's not any, I don't necessarily think all the discussion and dirty laundry has to be aired in public. I think that's certainly
Could be
worth
on consent
thinking
calendar, I
about.
guess.
Well, I actually really appreciate that if you start on 6:15, all of the steps that have to happen before you ever get to these. And I just don't want us to forget the numerous steps along the way before we ever get to financial consequences. Yes.
So I have two ideas, and I don't know if this is going to fix it. It might be a middle ground.
Okay.
But one way would be to not have boards or superintendent's corrective action, but instead call it a school fees corrective action. And then depending on whether the entity appeals or not, because if they appeal and it becomes to the board, at that point, you're right, it's the board who's now entered into the corrective action and is mandating it, versus if the LEA chooses to not appeal and bring it to the board, it would be the superintendent essentially directing that corrective action. So one thing we could do is either define school fee corrective action plan or just say corrective action plan and not put superintendent or board. And then I would recommend at the very least, no matter what we do, that 8B be rewritten to state the LEA may, within 15 days after receipt of a notice described in subsection 8A, request an appeal to the board, before the board. And then, if the LEA does not request the hearing, which would be the appeal before the board, or after the superintendent, see, I just think that maybe we need to be very clear about both of the appeals. I don't know if you want the informal appeal or this more formal appeal to come before you, but that might be a way to allow LEAs to choose whether they want to bring this to the public sphere and to the board's attention, which I think they would do if they felt like whatever the superintendent was doing was unjust. It might just be a way to kind of have both routes available for LEAs so that every time there's a financial consequence, you don't have to come to a board in a public meeting. But I could work on that if that. Otherwise, I think that what Board Member Lear is proposing here, if you want the board to be the one making all of those decisions along the way, we probably should change all of these to board the way she's proposed.
So what you were saying, sorry, it would be a school fees, what were you saying?
Corrective action
Oh, okay.
plan.
But that would be set up by the superintendent, correct?
Correct, unless and until there's an appeal or the
Right.
LEA engages the board into that process through an appeal, then essentially it's in the board's control. But do you see that it's the corrective
No.
action plan? You don't have to
Yeah.
label it as superintendent or board. It's essentially.
I
yeah.
actually like that because then it protects the LEA, and then if there is an injustice that's being done or the LEA feels like there is, then at that point they could choose to make it public to the board and appeal and move forward that direction. So I'm good with that.
One thought about this, Laura, that maybe if I might, this was a holdover from the 25-year-old rule, this whole convoluted language that I probably have some ownership of. So I would maybe suggest that, Angie, could you look at just streamlining this language generally with the idea, at least in my mind, that the final appeal is to the board and the final decider is the board in the administrative process. And then this could read a lot more cleanly. Because with all the other things you had to rewrite, this just thinking that it was an unlikely option didn't really get a lot of process.
So this language, although it looks like it's not new on this paper, it actually is all brand new. I just marked it like that so that people could see your amendments, so I apologize. But remember the school fees task force did that diagram, a process that was pretty specific, and that's what this was based on. And I think you said two things. One is to make sure that the board has final appellate authority. Absolutely. That's the way it should have been. I think it's just not stated as explicitly as it should. But the second thing you just stated was that the board has all administrative authority.
No, I didn't say that. I said final administrative action is taken by the board.
But see, then aren't we just saying then if the LEA doesn't want to make it public and they're okay with whatever the action is, you're now making it be public? I didn't mean to say that. It seems like in all of our board rules and our procedures that there are lots of steps earlier on where it just ends and the LEA agrees. And then we're done. And that doesn't necessarily become public. It's just the board, the LEA does what the board rule dictates. So thinking that would be the same here, that the appellate process then is to the board, and it doesn't. And again, I feel like we're maybe overcomplicating this, and maybe with more time, not to make this your problem, we could spell out just the steps. But the two things, when I said the final administrative decision, it's only if it's an appellate decision that it would be the final administrative decision. Okay.
Yeah, not if it's earlier on. I don't think the board needs to jump in at step 2 and say, yeah, we agree with the superintendent. It's done. It's what
Angie, I'm thinking that without objection, that you're okay with Angie just cleaning this language up a bit to include that the board has the final appellate overview.
Yes.
Not overview, decision.
Starting on 8B, I believe is what
I don't even know, she may have to go higher than that.
I'll look
Up into
through and
7
make
to
sure
make
it's
it work,
clear.
Michelle. She may have to go up to 7.
I think we're good.
Yeah,
Okay.
I think I've got the gist.
Scott, did you have a question? Oh, I thought I saw your hand up there. Okay.
I have one more thing that let me just.
It is not on your list, Carol.
No, it's not. But it did come up in the previous discussion,
Okay.
and it's more just a question for this committee,
Thank you.
if that's okay.
Yeah.
You said that if a school.
Is your light on?
I may have turned it off.
Yeah, okay. Thank you.
I was thinking you'd hope I'd be done. If a school doesn't charge fees, a district doesn't charge fees, that there'd be no need for a schedule or a notice or anything else. I think this came up, I'm having this deep dark memory from my, from previous years. I think this came up, and one of the things that was considered then was that even if that's the case, should all the employees of the LEA, all the parents, the community members of that LEA, still be clear that there can't be any fees charged. So in an LEA that decides not to charge fees, there can't be a sixth grade teacher that says, we've got a field trip planned, bring your $5.
I think that might be a little more clear now, Carol, with the definition of what fees are. That's pretty clear. It may or may not.
It may, I just keep using my hands, that's why I turned this up. I just saying, I think that's worth thinking about in LEAs where they would say we don't charge fees.
Okay.
You'd still,
All right.
it would be important for parents to know what the rules are, important for employees to know what the rules are, and there maybe should still be some information about fees that is posted and or available in those LEAs.
Okay. Tamara, you might, would you add that to your list to maybe make sure that we watch that to come up in the future? It may not come out today, but.
Yeah, as we're looking at that training piece that we're required to do at the USBE, that's certainly on my list to make sure that we're reaching all audiences, which include
Okay.
the teachers, the parents.
All right, so if you, I'm going to pass that to Tamara. Okay.
Thank you for your patience.
No, thank you. We appreciate it, Carol. And Carol, don't forget to come up here before you leave. Okay. Does anyone in the audience have anything they'd like to bring up now at this point? Okay, I will come back to committee for a motion.
Oh, yeah, I'd make a motion.
Oh, go for it.
I would make a motion that we adopt,
No,
or that we send this, I'm trying to make sure I get this right.
Angie, you want to help us with verbiage?
Angie, that we adopt R277407
Draft 5 with amendments
With amendment.
that I'll bring in draft 6.
draft 5 with amendments on first reading to the full board for consideration. Or on second and final reading. Thank you.
Oh, my gosh.
A mouthful.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? And Mark is still here, so I'm hoping that we can get him on record to vote yes. So we may just,
There's already 3 of us that if it's a done deal.
yes, but it's always nice when it comes to the board and it's unanimous. So I am, if you'll just wait so that I can, if you don't
It's not
mind.
unanimous if there's not a,
Well,
we have a quorum. It's
we have
unanimous
a
in the
quorum, but then it will, okay, then let's do that, because he's really here. I think he just went resting.
Do you want me to go out, see if I can find him?
Yeah, so it's not
Go
like
knock
we're-
on the
it's not
men's
like we're
room,
waiting
Angie.
till next week. We're waiting hopefully a minute, maybe. You're not going. You're not going.
Send Angie. I was just going to see if it was in the hall. I would not have gone in the restroom.
Yeah.
Somebody let him in, please.
So I'm not really sure of protocol, how this is done now, but Chair, we had a vote to send this to the full board on first reading and then have them consider it on second and final reading. So how would you vote on that?
I'm a aye.
Okay, then the vote is unanimous to send this to the full board. And Gloria, hallelujah. I just do want to tell you that, I don't know if Carol brought this up. So she was on the task force and Mary's here. I don't know, is anyone else in the audience we're on the task force? So thank you for your hours and hours of work. Okay, we're out. Over now, we'll go.
Really? I thought I was going to call in. I was all excited.
You can still call in.
I got to go.
You can call in. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Hey, thank you, Carol.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
You can get all dressed up.
I had to leave work to come straight here.
Just giving you the biz.
I know. I appreciate it, Carol. Appreciate you coming from the.
Yes, I know. It'd be just boring if nobody noticed.
Yeah.
Well, that was fun, yeah.
So much fun.
My life's a legislature.
Big money.
You need to try it. If you have never tried it,
I guess there's going to be a separate.
I'm sure I'm picturing that when I was college
I've been getting this stuff. Okay.
A couple blocks north is sheer boredom being punctuated by absolute panic.
And we know we're appreciating you. Just can't, and essentially stop asking for money. That's kind of the mistake. No. And it starts every, and I want to jump